Emerging pre-election security concerns is Human Rights Watch researcher Otsieno Namwya. Thank you very much for coming in, as well as Daniel Juma from the Global Peace Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen. Otsieno, quickly, let's start with that particular report. What were some of the findings you came up with?
Yeah, we did spend quite some time in Naivasha, in various neighborhoods in Naivasha, which were some of the worst affected with the 2007 post-election violence. And one of the things that came up is that people are already packing their belongings and leaving for fear of another election-related violence in August. And when we asked them whether it is just out of fear or whether there is something more to it, one of the things that came up is that there is indeed there are threats that are being meted out against some communities. There is also a lot of intimidation. But the main problem is that some of the people who have faced threats have reported some of these threats to police, and the police have not investigated. So people don't feel that even if they opted to stay around and vote, police will actually be able to protect them when the threats come, or when the violence happens, the police will be able to respond and actually effectively deal with the violence. So there's that problem of confidence or lack of confidence in the police.
So what would people in Naivasha, you focused on Naivasha. We know that Naivasha was one of the most affected in the 2007, 2008 post-election violence. We didn't get much of these reports in the run-up to the 2013 elections. So why this particular one?
I think in the run-up to 2013, it's just that people didn't actually go there. But my understanding is that there were similar threats in the run-up to 2013. However, before 2007, Naivasha was not like this. Naivasha was a very peaceful area. But given what happened in 2007 and the lack of accountability for the violence that happened in 2007, I think there's a lot of bitterness. I think there have been peace meetings and intercommunal discussions and dialogue. But that hasn't exactly yielded the kind of peace that will be required in the lead up to the elections, especially a tightly contested race like this one. But also the fact that police, some of the key reforms that were required after the 2007 violence, either haven't happened or the bit that happened has actually been rolled back, isn't helping the situation. A case in point is the reforms with the police. People. And this came from the ground. This is not me. I would probably agree, but I was surprised that people on the ground do understand that actually police reforms have not exactly yielded the results that they needed. They don't see police responding. They don't see police investigating. In some cases, police themselves become the problem, and people don't feel free to go to the police to report. In the absence of that, it becomes very difficult to deal with the issue.
Daniel, it seems that dark shadow cast on this country after the 2007 elections keeps rearing its head every election year, just a few months to it, and probably during the election. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate that this country has to be held at ransom every election year. I think we need, as a nation, to put this behind us. And that's why, for me, I've always called upon institutions that are charged with delivering elections. I think they need to do their best to ensure that the coming elections are held in a transparent, in a free and fair manner, so that we avoid any fears of elections being rigged, or any fears of violence. I think we are generally a peaceful nation. Kenya is a peaceful country, and that's the reason why people are not fighting now. But you hear people saying that, okay, if the elections are not well done, then there's going to be violence. So for me, I would just urge all the institutions, from the police to the IEBC. Actually, the biggest responsibility is with the IEBC to ensure that really they deliver transparent and fair elections. Regarding what's happening in Naivasha, it's very sad that this can be going on now, because I remember 2007, whatever happened in the Rift Valley was very, very sad. And we did a campaign called Rift Valley Peace Initiative, where the youth actually came and spoke about what went on, how some of them were used by politicians to be able to cause chaos. I am hoping that the security agency, and I have faith in our security agency, that they can actually take these threats seriously, and they can assure the people that, there is nothing of that sort, of that nature, that will happen to them. Yeah.
Well, from what he says, the people seem to have very little or lack of confidence in the police. And some of the solutions that have been given by the authorities is that we'll add the number of security officers. But does this mean anything when the people do not trust the very security officers? I'll start with you, Otsieno.
It's unfortunate, but part of the problem is that the way we have handled our national institutions, and also the way the institutions themselves have discharged their duties. He talks about the IEBC. A lot of the controversy that surrounds the IEBC, whether it is with the elections, the ballot tendering process, or with the voter register, is actually, if you go to the ground, you find it down there on the ground, and people discuss it, and people get divided along those political lines, and threats actually come along, begin as people argue in Nairobi. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I was shocked to learn is that in 2016, that is last year, in June, as NASA, then CORD, was organizing anti-IEBC protests. In Naivasha, that again was reflected there, and communities started threatening each other. And one of the very first instances of people leaving Naivasha was actually last year in May and June, between communities, because the situation became very tense. And right now, as we speak, the kind of political atmosphere that we're experiencing now, and the discussions around IEBC and the failure of the police, the concerns around the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, and how the Supreme Court handled the 2013 case, these issues are actually being reflected on the ground. And so it is important that when people get charged with responsibilities in certain institutions to do certain work, they should do it as per the law. And that will be the only way to avert violence. So
for you, it is the lack of accountability for the 2007, 2008 post-election violence that we keep finding ourselves in this situation?
Partly that is it, the lack of accountability, because some of the youth that we were told are moving around threatening people are supposed to be the youth who participated in the violence, and nothing happened to them. But the other problem is that we never actually implemented some of the things that we were supposed to implement soon after the violence. Some of the recommendations after the Kofi Annan, the KNDR process, and some of the recommendations that were contained in the Waki report. Some of those things have not been implemented. The police reforms have happened, but you know what has happened since 2013. There are certain legislations that we have introduced that have basically taken away what we were supposed to have been enforcing. So that's part of the problem.
All right, Daniel, do you agree that the lack of accountability is why we keep finding ourselves in this situation every election year?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons. For example, look 2007 happened, whether they like it or not. You can't wish it away. It happened. But, you know, especially after the ICC cases were thrown out, actually the people who were at the ICC did not actually cast any stone. They didn't, the youths that killed, that maimed, were set free. They were never arraigned in court. And they're the same youths probably right now who would be threatening the violence because nothing happened to them. This is the problem with this country. I would have expected that even after the ICC cases were thrown out, our own institutions, you know, the judiciary, you know, the DPP, would have ensured that those that actually maimed, that burnt houses, I think the police knows that. Yeah. Something should have been done.
So what is expected from the political class as we end?
As we are going forward, I think the police must enhance, you know, accountability, and most importantly is all institutions, including the police, should demonstrate equitable application of the law. You know, they should not be seen to be partisan, because this is the problem that will that we will see. Because the moment the ordinary youths feel that the institutions are partisan, then they take the law in their hands.
All right. What are your recommendations? Yes.
First of all, I'll give you an example of a case of a lady I talked to in Naivasha. She was affected in 2007. Her property was destroyed, her house was burned down, she was beaten, and then she ended up being an IDP in a police station. And since then, she has registered in Naivasha twice to be compensated. And then she was told she needs to go back to her home village, which is in Siaya, and she has gone back there thrice and registered thrice to be compensated. Up to now, she's still waiting for that compensation. She has not been compensated for the destruction of her property. Nothing has happened. But she hears that other people are being compensated. Right now, she's moving into another election. She's in Naivasha still. She has managed to set up some small business. But again, she still has to fold up because she's saying she can't wait to see what happened to her in 2007. So one of the things that Kenya needs to begin to do is to ensure that some of these processes are done without discrimination. Like when you're compensating IDPs, have a clear database of all the IDPs across the country who were affected in 2007 and compensate all of them without discrimination along whichever line. The other is to ensure that the laws are enforced and that institutions that are supposed to work like the police actually do their work. Part of the problem is that these institutions are not working. There's a lot of political interference. And part of what we are seeing in Naivasha is actually a reflection of what could be happening in other parts of the country. It's not just a Naivasha problem.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Otsieno Namwya is a human rights watcher researcher, and Daniel Juma is from the Global Peace Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in and helping us expound on that. At this point, let's now take a look at what else is making headlines on the international papers. I'll hand it over to you, Trixie Ngado, to take us through that.
Okay, sir. So let's take a look at what's making headlines across the world in various parts based on the media coverage. So we're starting off today with